The elderly widow had nowhere to go after her son threw her out of the house. But only 3 days later, her late aunt's will would lead her to an unexpected inheritance and a chance to rewrite her destiny. Rain fell gently from the grey skies of Virginia. Laura Davis stood by the living room window, watching the trails the raindrops left on the glass. That morning, she felt the same way she had on the cursed day her husband was electrocuted. On the wall, the old frame still held his smiling face, a coffee cup in one hand, a half-repaired radio in the other. Thomas Davis, master electrician. The plaque still rested beneath the photo, a dusty memory now, but Laura said a short prayer in front of it every morning. Since moving into her son's house, she had learned to whisper that prayer quietly. Her daughter-in-law, Victoria, was even disturbed by the echo of faith that lingered in the walls. Every time Laura heard that subtle tone of irritation in Victoria's voice, her heart ached. Victoria never insulted her outright. She built invisible walls with her words. "I'll wash the dishes." "Laura, you sit down," Victoria would say. But the emphasis in her tone was clear. "Don't touch anything." "Thank you," Laura would reply softly. Setting down the sponge and returning to her chair, she spent most of her days in the living room, watching her granddaughter. Emily play with her dolls had become a movie she never wanted to end. The little girl tied her blonde hair into 2 braids and asked questions endlessly. "Grandma, what should this doll's name be?" Laura always gave a different name: Ruth, Helen, Margaret. Names that came from somewhere familiar. They were all friends from her childhood. Her son Nicholas usually came home late and exhausted. He worked long hours at the construction site. And when he returned, he would quietly sit on the couch and turn on the TV. Laura saw her husband's face in his. The same furrowed brow, the same silence. But the distance between them had grown over the years. They looked at each other but rarely spoke. Victoria had made it her duty to fill that silence during dinner. Her voice was always the loudest at the table. "Emily, hold your spoon properly." "Nicholas, your mother oversalted the meal again tonight." At those moments, Laura would lower her head, trying to smile. "I'll be more careful next time." But there was never a real smile on Victoria's face. One evening, Emily knelt beside her grandmother. "Grandma, sometimes Mom gets mad at you, doesn't she?" Laura smiled gently, placing her hands on the child's hair. "Everyone gets angry sometimes, sweetheart. That doesn't mean they don't love you." "I love you very much," Emily said. Laura's eyes welled up. "And I love you, my dear." That night, from down the hall, Laura could hear Victoria talking to Nicholas in their room. Her voice carried all the way to Laura's door. "This can't go on, Nick. It's been 3 years. I can't breathe in this house anymore. Victoria, she's my mother. Since Dad died, she's had no one. I know, but she's always hovering around. She confuses Emily. I just want peace." Laura stood silently behind the door, holding her breath. Her heart felt trapped between her ribs. A voice inside her whispered, "Don't listen," but she already had. The next morning, Victoria made her plan to send Laura away. She knew the only way to convince her husband was through their daughter, Emily. "I want you to tell Daddy something tonight," she said sweetly. The little girl looked up, confused. "What should I say?" "Tell him Grandma sometimes hits you, okay? Just once. Let him hear it." Emily's eyes filled with tears. "But Grandma never hit me." Victoria leaned closer, lowering her voice. "I know, sweetheart, but think of it as a little game. Just this one time." The child nodded hesitantly, fear in her eyes. That evening, Nicholas came home from work. Emily ran up to him, torn between fear and obedience. Her mother's eyes followed from behind. "Daddy," she said quietly, "Grandma hits me." "I'm scared." Nicholas froze. His briefcase slipped from his hand. "What did you say?" "She hits me." Laura, walking out from the kitchen, caught the words in mid-air. "Emily, sweetheart, what are you saying?" Nicholas's voice hardened. "Mom, is this true?" "No, never." "I would never lay a hand on my granddaughter." Victoria played her part perfectly. "Nick, maybe Emily misunderstood." "Quiet, Victoria!" Nicholas shouted, but his anger had already found its target. Laura saw the fury in her son's eyes. "Nick, my son, I swear, that's enough, Mom!" he yelled, slamming his hand on the table. We've had enough chaos since Dad died, and now this. You need to leave. Right now, silence fell. Emily began to cry. Laura's lips trembled, but no words came out. Go, Nicholas said again, quieter this time, but more devastating. Laura went to her room and packed a small bag, a few clothes, her medicine and one framed photo. She walked to the door. Victoria turned her head away, pretending she wasn't part of it. Laura looked one last time at her granddaughter. The little girl clung to her mother's skirt, sobbing. When the door closed behind her, the wind began to howl. The rain had started again. Puddles shimmered under the streetlights. Laura walked slowly, her cane striking the wet pavement. The city was silent, but inside her a storm raged. Thomas, if only you were here. I wouldn't have fallen this low. By 2 a.m., her legs could barely carry her. She stopped by the edge of a park. Her old brown coat was soaked through. The city felt foreign, as if everyone had a home except her. For a moment, she pressed her cane between her knees and lowered her head. I have no one left, she whispered to herself. Then she noticed a light across the street, a small cafe still open. The sign read, "Midnight Diner." Inside, a man was wiping glasses. Laura hesitated, then leaned on her cane and crossed the street. The bell above the door jingled as she entered. The man looked up, tall, grey-haired in his 40s, with tired but kind eyes. He looked like someone who had known pain and learned compassion from it. "It's dangerous to be out this late, ma'am," he said gently. "Sit down. I'll get you a hot tea." Laura smiled faintly, her voice weak. "I just needed to rest. I don't have a home anymore." The man's eyes softened. "My name's Thomas. I own this place. There's a small room in the back. You can stay there until you find somewhere else." Laura's eyes filled with tears. "Why would you do that?" "Because once someone did the same for me. Under the dim lights and the quiet song of rain, a stranger's kindness rekindled her hope, and in that moment, a new door quietly opened in Laura's life. When she entered the small room Thomas showed her, the air was still damp, but the smell of coffee from the cafe had settled inside. The room was simple but clean, a single bed, a small table and a pale yellow lamp. Laura stared at the warm light of the lamp, feeling a sense of safety she hadn't felt in years. "This is enough," she whispered. That night, before sleeping, she looked out the window. The rain had slowed, and the pavement under the streetlights sparkled with droplets. She set her cane beside the bed and placed her hand over her heart. "Thomas, I wish you could see me now," she whispered, and in that moment, she realized that loneliness wasn't about being alone. Sometimes, you could feel just as lonely inside a house full of people. The next morning, the cafe was quiet. Thomas was behind the counter, starting the coffee machine. Laura walked up slowly. "Good morning," she said softly. Thomas smiled. "Good morning, ma'am. I hope the bed was comfortable. For the first time in years, I slept peacefully," she said, her voice trembling. "That sentence alone makes everything worth it," he replied. "Coffee?" Laura nodded. For a while they sat in silence as the town outside began to wake. As Thomas placed the cup on the counter, he asked, "What happened? Why were you out on the street?" Laura paused, wrapping her hands around the warm cup as if drawing courage from it. "My son threw me out." He raised his eyebrows. "Threw you out?" She nodded. "Not exactly him, his wife. She told a lie to turn him against me. My granddaughter. She's just a little girl. It came from her mouth." Her voice broke. Thomas stayed quiet for a while, then said softly, "Sometimes people make mistakes. But sometimes those mistakes lead us to the right places." Laura held on to those words. From that day on, the cafe became her home. She arranged cups behind the counter, wiped tables, smiled at customers. Thomas never asked her for money, but Laura insisted on helping. "You helped me," she said. "Now it's my turn." 3 days passed. The rain gave way to sunshine. Laura no longer leaned so heavily on her cane when she opened the cafe each morning. She spoke with people, listened to their stories. A man sending his daughter to college, a woman who still loved her ex-husband. Those small stories reminded her of her own humanity. One morning, while cleaning the bell on the door, Thomas asked, "So where will you go next?" Laura shrugged. "I don't know. Maybe back to the town where I was born." "But there's no one left there." Thomas smiled gently. "Sometimes people don't stay, but memories do. Maybe you should go." Laura looked at him quietly. There was something in his eyes, a reflection of his own solitude. That afternoon, the cafe phone rang. Thomas was in the back, but Laura was closest to the counter. "Midnight Diner, hello?" "May I speak with Laura Davis?" said a man's voice on the line. Laura paused. "This is she. I'm attorney James Calloway. It took some time to find you. I'm afraid I have to inform you of the passing of your aunt, Elizabeth Moore." Laura's heart sped up. "Elizabeth? I last saw her when I was a child." "Yes. She had no children of her own. As her closest relative, she left her entire estate to you. The will was approved today." Laura nearly stopped breathing. "By estate? How much?" There was a brief silence. The lawyer's voice turned solemn. "Exactly $150 million, Miss Davis." Time stopped. Laura held the phone, the words echoing in her mind. "Is this a joke?" "No, ma'am. The documents are ready. You can come to my office to sign if you like." After hanging up, Laura stood for a while, thinking she must be imagining things. Thomas noticed the shock on her face. Did something happen? Laura slowly raised her head. "I think my life is about to change." That evening, she met with the lawyer. His office was in an old building downtown. Vintage courtroom photos lined the walls. James Calloway was an elderly man with a reassuring smile. He placed the documents before her. "Your aunt preserved her real estate, shares, and bank accounts all these years. It seems she had no one else to leave them to but you." Laura picked up the pen and noticed her hand trembling. "All these years. No one ever left me anything. And I left no debts to anyone," she said. The lawyer nodded slightly. "Sometimes life changes direction at exactly those moments." The signatures were completed. Within a few days, the transfer went through. Laura never forgot the moment the money hit the bank. That day she cried for a long time, not from joy, but from the miracle that arrives at the end of injustice. A week later, she moved to a house near Charlottesville, surrounded by woods. The house was painted white, with a porch swing out front. In the yard, an old walnut tree reached into the sky. On the first night after arranging her things, she stepped onto the porch with a cup of coffee and gazed into the quiet. "Thomas, I wish you were here," she said. The next morning, she went to the town bank and withdrew an amount. When she arrived at the old cafe with the sign, "Midnight Diner," Thomas was inside. She opened the door. The bell rang. "Laura, you're back," Thomas said. "Yes, and I came for something." She placed an envelope on the table. Inside was a bank receipt. Thomas opened it, and his eyes widened. "Why are you giving me this much?" Laura smiled. "That night you gave me a room. You helped me come back to life. Now it's my turn. Use this to grow the cafe. And I want you to change the name." Thomas asked in astonishment, "What should I call it?" "Second Chance Diner." That day, the sign over the cafe changed. Laura returned to her small town, but fate had one more reckoning for Laura. That night, the phone rang. It was her son. When she saw Nicholas on the screen, her heart tightened. She hesitated. No one could blame her if she didn't answer. But she did. "Mom," came the voice after a long silence. "Where are you? I've been calling for days." "Victoria. She's sick." Laura took a deep breath. "What illness?" "Brain tumor. The doctors say surgery, but we need $200,000. Silence fell. Laura's eyes drifted to the window, to the starless sky. On one side lay the pain of the past, on the other, the weight of forgiveness. "Send me the hospital's name tomorrow morning," she said. "Mom, with what money are you going to help?" "I am going to save Emily's mother," Laura said. There was no anger in her voice, only a tired peace. She ended the call. Outside, the wind rose. The silence inside the house echoed like a prayer. Sometimes God gives the broken-hearted two chances at life, one to forgive and one to forget. Laura woke before dawn the next morning. She hadn't slept at all. Her phone lay by her bed. The last conversation still burned on the screen. Nicholas's words echoed in her mind. Brain tumor, $200,000. As she made her coffee, she looked out the window. The branches of the walnut tree swayed gently in the wind. Holding her cup, she murmured to herself, "Sometimes you only learn how strong your heart is once it's been broken." Around noon, she went to the bank. Quietly, without drawing attention, she withdrew a certain amount. There were still millions in the account, but it wasn't the weight of the money that tired her. It was its meaning. The teller wore a polite, practiced smile. "Miss Davis, are you sure? This is a rather large amount." Laura smiled faintly. "Yes, I'm sure." When she transferred the money to the hospital, she thought about where it was going. Perhaps a portion of money is part of God's silent plan. When the process was complete, she stared at the hospital's email for a long time. "Dear Laura Davis, your payment of $200,000 on behalf of Nicholas Davis has been received. The surgery is confirmed for tomorrow at 8:30 a.m. In that moment, Laura felt a strange peace. The bitterness that had lived in her for years yielded to a heavy but clean silence. The next morning, she walked through the grey hospital corridors with a tangle of feelings, anger, love, regret, all intertwined. Nicholas froze when he saw her at the door. "Mom," Laura nodded gently. "I wanted to see her once before the surgery." Victoria lay on the gurney. Her face was pale, her eyes tired. When she saw Laura, she began to cry. "Why? Why did you do this? I treated you so badly." Laura approached quietly and placed her hand over Victoria's. "For Emily," she said simply, "a child shouldn't grow up without a mother. Forgiveness is sometimes left to God." Victoria turned her head and sobbed. In that moment, the hatred between them dissolved. Nicholas looked away. "Mom, Don't say anything," Laura cut in. "My heart has already heard all there is to say." Leaning on her cane, Laura's steps echoed along the hospital's cold floor. There was no longer any weight to them. When she stepped outside, the sun made her squint. She hadn't seen such a bright morning in a long time. Days passed. The surgery was successful. Sitting on a bench across from the hospital when the doctors said Victoria was improving, Laura looked up at a white cloud drifting in the sky. She placed a hand over her heart, eyes filling. "Thomas, I think we won again," she whispered. In the weeks that followed, Laura's life settled into something simple yet meaningful. She rose early, drank her coffee beneath the walnut tree, and spent her afternoons helping the townspeople. She paid someone's debt, helped another with tuition. She didn't let the money change her life. She used it to change others. She bought books for the town's children. She donated to restore the old library. But the place she spent the most time was Thomas's cafe, now called Second Chance Diner. The cafe was livelier than ever. The walls were painted in pastel tones. Small potted plants sat in the corners. People lined up for breakfast in the mornings. Thomas treated every customer with care, and when Laura came, he prepared her coffee with his own hands. The next day, Nicholas called. "Mum, the surgery went very well. Victoria is recovering. I don't know how to thank you." Laura stayed quiet. Nicholas continued. "Emily really wants to see you. She keeps asking about you." Laura's voice trembled. "Emily, truly?" "Yes. I want to bring her to you tomorrow. Is that okay?" Laura took a deep breath. "Okay." Emily was what she loved most in this world. For 3 years, her only beautiful moments in that restless house had been with that little girl. The next morning, as Laura sat on the porch swing, a small car appeared at the end of the road. Emily leapt out the moment the door opened. "Grandma!" Laura set her cane down and opened her arms. The little girl threw herself into her embrace. "I lied," Emily sobbed. "Mom told me to, but I never wanted you to leave." Laura held her tightly. "I know, sweetheart. Mothers make mistakes sometimes, but children feel the truth with their hearts." Nicholas stood a little ways off, his face full of regret. "Mom, if you'll allow it, we'd like to come here sometimes. Emily misses you so much." Laura nodded. "My door isn't closed to you, Nicholas. But some wounds need time. We can fill that time together." That day, she hung a swing from the walnut tree for Emily. The child's laughter mingled with the breeze. Laura sat on the porch and watched them. Life, in its strange way, had found its balance. A week later, Laura found a letter in her mailbox. Sender, Nicholas Davis. Inside was a small drawing, Emily's. In it there was a big house, a woman and a child. Above it she had written, "Grandma and me under the walnut tree." Tears rolled down Laura's cheeks. She placed the drawing on the table, took her cane, and walked into the yard. The sky was clear, the air warm. She touched the trunk of the walnut tree. "I'm still here," she told herself. "And this time, no one can throw me out." That night she added a long page to her diary. "Kindness does not rush to return to a person. But one day, at the quietest hour of your heart, it knocks on the door. So answer no one with cruelty, answer with silence. Silence is the language of conscience, the echo of forgiveness." As she set down her pen, she lifted her head. Outside the window, moonlight fell across the walnut branches. Her eyes grew wet, but she did not cry. There was a quiet peace within her, because Laura Davis was no longer alone. She was the echo of kindness itself. The quiet of the town's morning had settled into Laura's heart. The walnut tree in the yard swayed gently in the wind, its falling leaves landing before the porch. For a week, Emily and Nicholas called every day, and since being discharged from the hospital, Victoria sent short messages of thanks. Each of them, in their own way, was trying to mend the broken bonds, but there was still a silent wound inside Laura. The only place that could close it was the cemetery, where the man she once loved lay. That morning, she put on her grey coat. She slipped a letter into her wallet and took a few flowers in her hand. Leaning on her cane, she stepped outside, walking slowly. The road out of town was covered in clouds, but there was no rain. The weather fit a quiet farewell. When she reached the cemetery, the moss on the stones caught her eye. Some letters had faded. Some stones had tilted. When she found her husband's grave, her knees trembled. The stone still read, "Thomas Davis, 1949-2022. She knelt beside it. She placed the flowers gently on the earth. For a while she said nothing. The sound of the wind, the distant echo of the bell tower. They were like curtains of silence. Then she began to speak, as if he were sitting across from her. "Thomas, it's been 3 years. For 3 years, everything has felt incomplete without you. I moved into our son's house, thought it would be good at first, but being lonely in a crowd is like living in an empty home." She drew a deep breath. "Sometimes I wondered if things would have been different if you hadn't gone. Maybe we would still argue, still fall silent. But at least we would hear each other. Now people shout, but no one hears anyone, Thomas." Tears slid down her cheeks. She placed her hands on the earth. Damp leaves clung between her fingers. "One night I ended up on the street. They threw me out of the house. Yes, my own son. But I want you to know, I didn't get angry with him. I didn't, because years ago you told me some mistakes can only be corrected with love. Maybe that's why I stayed quiet. That's why, when he begged me on the phone, my heart was broken. But I couldn't turn away. The wind blew a little harder." Laura lifted her head. A shaft of light broke through the clouds and fell across the gravestone. "You know, Thomas," she said with a small smile, "I had an aunt, Elizabeth. Before she died, she left everything to me. $150 million, she laughed, though there was sorrow in her voice. "Isn't it strange? Money doesn't change anything anymore. Because if you had been beside me that night, I would have needed not numbers in a bank, but a warm word." She took a small envelope from her pocket. On it was written, "My story. I wrote this letter to you. You won't be able to read it, but I will," she said. She opened the letter and began to read in a low voice. "My dear Thomas, when everything was over, one thing remained in me, the silence you taught me, a silence that does not judge, does not shout, only listens. In that silence, I heard God's whisper. He gave me one more chance to forgive. I forgave Victoria, because I don't have to love her. But I didn't want my granddaughter to grow up without a grandmother's love. I didn't get angry with Nicholas either, because he carries your blood. One day, perhaps somewhere, we will meet again. When that day comes, I want to be able to say to you, I did it, just as you always made me proud. With love, Laura." She folded the letter and tucked it beneath the earth. She sat for a while longer. Then, leaning on her cane, she stood up. Her eyes were full, but her face was at peace. Just as she was leaving, she heard a voice behind her. "Grandma." She turned. Emily was running toward her, Nicholas a few steps behind. Startled, Laura gripped her cane. "Emily, sweetheart." "What are you doing here?" The little girl was out of breath. "We looked for you at home with Dad. You weren't there." Dad said, "I think your grandma went to see your grandpa." He was right. Nicholas came closer. "Mom, I didn't want to leave you alone." Tears filled Laura's eyes. "I wanted to come here alone, but I'm glad you came." The three of them stood silently by the grave. Emily sat on the ground and straightened the flowers with her small hands. "Is this my grandpa?" "Yes, sweetheart," Laura said. "He was a very good man, not just a good husband. A good person," Emily smiled. "Then he must be watching you now." Laura trembled at the child's words. At that moment, a beam of light slipped through the clouds above. It felt as if Thomas truly was there. Nicholas placed a hand on his mother's shoulder. "Mom, I know no apology is enough, but I want you to know I remember the night I threw you out of the house every single day. Can you forgive me?" Laura lifted her head, her eyes wet. "I forgave you long ago, my son." "Not that night. Every morning after, I kept you in my prayers." Nicholas bowed his head to keep from crying. For a while, the three of them stood quietly in front of the grave. Then Laura planted her cane in the earth and looked at her husband one last time. "Do you see, Thomas?" she said softly. "In the end, everything found its way back together. I finished the story from where you left it. On the drive home that afternoon, the fields along the road gleamed gold. Emily slept in the back seat. Nicholas drove slowly, while an old country song played on the radio. Laura closed her eyes. Amid the melody, she felt she could hear her husband's voice. "You did it, Laura," it seemed to say. A faint smile touched her lips. When they reached the house, the sun was about to set. Emily ran to the yard and climbed onto the swing beneath the walnut tree. Laura stepped onto the porch and sat quietly. Nicholas came beside her. "We're not selling this house," he said. "This will be where we come together." Laura nodded. "This isn't just a house, my son. This is where we were reborn." They were silent for a while. As the sky turned orange, Laura set her cane aside and rested her hands on her knees. "Once I thought my life was over. But in truth that night, the night I stood in the rain with nowhere to go, that was when it began again." Nicholas looked at his mother. "If I were you, I couldn't have done it." Laura smiled softly. "Whatever a person thinks they cannot do, God tests them right there." Just then, Emily called from the swing, "Grandma, look!" A bird landed on the walnut tree. Laura lifted her head. A small sparrow had indeed settled on a thin branch. "That's a good sign," she said. Nicholas asked, "What do you mean?" "Thomas always said so. If a bird lands on your branch, hope is still there." As the sun dipped toward the horizon, a gentle light softened Laura's face. The year's fatigue lay hidden in the lines around her eyes. But in that moment, there was only peace. The walls of the house no longer held loneliness. They held a rebirth filled with love. That night, she opened to the last page of her journal. With a trembling but resolute hand, she wrote, "Today I said farewell to Thomas, but I also returned to myself. All my life I loved silence, because in silence I heard the voice of God. I'm no longer afraid. I've understood that what we lose teaches us who we are, and forgiveness is the greatest victory. She closed the notebook and turned off the lamp. Outside the window, the moon was rising. In the yard, the walnut tree's shadow stretched long, and the swing swayed gently in the wind. Laura drew a deep breath. From shadow to sunlight, she whispered. It was the last sentence of her story, and also the first word of a quiet beginning. If you felt Laura's story in your heart and watched the video to the end, don't forget to like and subscribe.